Namaste. Welcome back, beautiful souls. This is a continuation of my discussion regarding the Waite-Smith Tarot and the three versions that I shared with you last week. I will be commenting on them, just a few more things to say. And then I will be doing a side by side of the Albano-Waite Tarot, the Weiser Tarot, and the Universal, which are all recolored versions of Pamela Colman Smith's artwork and the amazing deck by Arthur E. Waite. So, welcome. If you're new, my name is Sadhana, and it's lovely to have you here. So, just recapping the decks that I shared with you last week from left to right are the Tarot of A.E. Waite. Now, this AGM deck is still available in multiple languages. It comes in a two-part box. And I did share with you last week a couple of differences between the French version and the German version. And I showed you the German version in the side by side. And as with many tarot decks over the years, the colors tends to change. There seems to be a lack of, I don't know whether it's the inks change or the printer themselves changes, but there's a lack of quality control from year to year. And I really do prefer the German version to my newer French version of the same deck, just because of the intensity of the color. This one comes with the brown, or I call them bronze, crackle backs or pebbled backs, which is consistent with the earliest version of the Waite-Smith Tarot, known as the Pam-A. And then in the center is the Centennial Tarot, which is also in illustration consistent with the very first Waite-Smith deck, the Pam-A. And then on the far right is a Lo Scarabeo publication. Here's the box for the Centennial Tarot. Most of you are familiar with this. It comes in a few different variations. On the far right is a Lo Scarabeo deck, also comes in a few different versions. And I think presently is being published with the blue lilies and roses on the back. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the deck backs in a second. Also below, which is new today, I'm going to add some links to a couple of articles by K. Frank Jensen, who has written in depth about the history and the versions of the early versions of the Waite-Smith Tarot that came out. And in those articles, he discusses differences among the Pam A, B, C, and D decks. And I believe in the earlier article, which is also linked below, he describes a Pam E deck. And one of the things that I want to do throughout this month, as I am comparing and contrasting RWS decks, is to see if I can match them with Pam A, B, C, or D. Just as an exercise, getting myself more familiar with the details that make these decks different. And one of the things will be deck backs, and another thing will be certain cards that have telling differences in their line drawings. So just to very quickly summarize what is in the articles below is that the Pam A deck was sold as late as 1920, he believes. So it was published in December 1909 and sold for at least 10 years. Perhaps then the plates became worn and new plates were created. Unfortunately, the new plates were not created from the pictorial guide to the tarot. They were created from something else. And as I reviewed a lot of these articles and some of my other references, I really feel that the deck on the far right, the Lo Scarabeo one, is very close to the Pam B deck. And it's really interesting to read the tone, the choice of description of these different variations. For the most part, the AGM deck and the Centennial do very closely follow or are a very good copy of the Pam A deck. The problem as well too with the Lo Scarabeo deck is the smaller card size or the narrower card size, which changes many things in perspective. Some things are cut off, and there's some funny squishing of faces and things like that. So on this card, the Nine of Pentacles, one of the telltale signs is the difference in the Venus sign on the gown of the woman in the Nine of Pentacles. Also, I noticed the color is quite a bit different, and there's no coloring on the earth over on the far right side. And whether you are interested in this or not, it's entirely up to you. But I just thought I would mention this because I think the more that you study these decks, the more interest you may have in building these connections. Another card that is discussed at length in Mr. Jensen's articles is the Sun card. And this is a very telling card. The only one of the decks that I shared last week that has Pamela Colman Smith's original font is the one in the center, the Centennial. And if you look closely at the face of the sun, there is a difference in the eyebrows. If you look above the sun to the right of the Roman numeral 19, you'll see that indeed this does follow the Pam B deck that doesn't have the extra little squiggle ray of the sun, which may have been a design error. And I love the discussion speculating on what that may or may not be, but you do see that in both the AGM deck and the Centennial Smith-Waite. And then it's really interesting, and I'm going to point this out when we look at the other cards today, and that is the wall that is behind the horse and the baby and the details that are on there. And if you look at Pixie's font, which is a favorite thing that I know a lot of people love to see in a Waite-Smith deck, it's makes it a very personal touch on each and every one of the cards, is the special, it almost looks like it could be runes, or it's a hidden message of love in this card. And as I think about this, I'm wondering if this is a connection to the Tarot de Marseille Sun card, which very much speaks of love. And we don't know the answer to this question, but in the both in the Centennial deck as well as in the AGM deck, you will see the letters LOVE just below the signature of Pamela Colman Smith. You can also see there are a lot of differences in the lines that are in the flag or the banner, and you can read more about that in the articles below. And the other card that is widely discussed is the Lover's card. And this is a really fascinating discussion. And I'm going to be looking at this card as well, too, in the other three decks today. I found it really interesting how he described the indifference of the facial expression of the angel in some of the cards. Waite, in his original manuscripts in the early edition of the books that were included with the Pam A deck, described the angel as, and I'm paraphrasing, emanating energy down towards the two figures in the card. And if you look at some of the newer and some of the different variations of the deck, it does really look like the angel has a disregard or an indifference for the humans that are standing below. So you can have a look out for that. And then when I compared again the Lo Scarabeo deck on the right to some of the illustrations of the Pam B, it most definitely is based on that deck, where the two on the left are more closely connected to the Pam A, or maybe even the Pam C. But I just really have found this extra bit of reading really interesting. There also was a link for a later version of K. Frank Jensen's articles in a book that came out of Australia, but I didn't put a link below because I have yet to find a source for the book. So it is, I believe it was about 215 pages or something, where these articles are about 9 or 10 pages. It would be really interesting to get my hands on that particular book. So, what are we looking at today? On the left is the Albano-Waite, the center is the Weiser, and the right is the Universal. The Albano-Waite Tarot went out of print in the late 1970s. I believe first was published in 1968. And the deck that you're looking at here is a current reproduction by US Games, and the copyright on my copy is 1991. So this deck has been around for a long time. There is no current information on Frankie Albano, who recolored this deck. From what I have read, he was a very interesting figure. He was also a musician, interestingly enough. The Weiser Tarot in the center came out in 2022. And unfortunately, there's no one credited for the coloring of this very colorful iteration of Pamela Colman Smith's work. The deck on the far right is the Universal Tarot that was first published about 1971. It was recolored by Mary Hanson Roberts. And one of the things I love about it is how clear the images are. The version that you are looking at is from about 1991. There are a few questions that I invite you to reflect upon as we go through these cards. And one is how the color changes affect you. Might they influence an interpretation, the mood, connections that you make in a reading? Or does a color shift cause enough pause that you might question something that you already know about a certain card? You'll also notice that on the bottom bar of the cards, we have different fonts, and on the deck in the center, we have both the Hebrew letters on the left and planetary symbols on the right. And I find it odd that Uranus is associated here with the Fool, as this particular deck was based on Book T, the teachings of Mathers, the Golden Dawn correspondences. And according to those teachings and that prescription, only the 7 classical planets were used in association with the zodiacal correspondences. Personally, I love the color purple and what that does for the richness of the deck. I find the clarity in the Albano-Waite really quite stunning. And the use of light in the two decks on the right is really beautiful, how the light frames the magician here. I think there's something to be said as well, too, for the Weiser Tarot, in that it does invite, it has been colored to become a deck of inclusiveness. In some ways, I would say that it's not fair to have the universal here, because the deck on the left and center are so saturated with color, which makes the universal look a little bit washed out in some cases. But on its own, it's really beautiful. The use of light and the images are so clear. Some of the cards in the Albano-Waite Tarot, I feel that the color is too saturated, or there's the layers, there's just too many layers. It becomes, the symbols become obscured. And yet, I really like that the fields are yellow. You can imagine that maybe there's corn or something growing in the back here. You also get a sense of that in the Universal Tarot. In both the Albano-Waite and the Weiser Tarot, some of the details are lost in the darkness, in the intensity of the color. So I do appreciate what's going on over here on the far right. And there is the issue of planetary correspondences. And if you incorporate that into your readings and you see so much purple for a martial card, does that affect you in any way? And in looking more closely at these decks, I'm wondering if the many layers and the blurring in the Albano-Waite is similar to the description, the experience of the Pam D. So be sure to have a look at how Jensen was describing those four iterations of the early Waite-Smith Tarot. All right, so here is the Lover's card. In all of them, the angel's eyes are closed. There is a benevolent kind of energy. I particularly like what's going on here in the Universal Tarot. The head of the snake appears to be in full focus, and the coloring of the mountain is quite different in each of these decks. And I encourage you to sit with that because for me, the mountain in the center has come to have a particular energy because you do see this mountain as well in the devil card. And there's something is lost in both of the cards on the far left and far right. And at this point, which color variation do you prefer? I have to say, this turquoise is really captivating. There is something about the relationship between the Hermit card and the Fool. And one of the things with the color changes that would be really nice is if the color shifts were consistent between these two cards. And I think the Weiser did a really good job with that, and no issue with what's going on in the Universal either. But there's something that I think lacks consistency in this particular deck. And then there is that beautiful turquoise on the hood of the Hermit. I really do like the purple veil behind Justice. You may also wish to compare some of these cards with your favorite Tarot de Marseille. This is one of the cards that I really do like in the Albano-Waite with the red sky reflecting the martial energy of Scorpio. There are so many shifts of color that one could discuss in these cards. The Hierophant's robe, for one, changed from this card. Granted, it may not be the exact same Hierophant, but that's certainly something. And then the woman from the Strength card also, she has a change of color. So I think if you are recoloring a deck, consistency of color is kind of important. I do like the skin color of the face of Death riding on the horse. That's really interesting as well too. And yet the Pope in the Universal Tarot also has a different vestment than in the Hierophant card. And I know this is the same in the Centennial Tarot, but I just mention this because I think it would be really useful for a study deck to have consistent colors for planetary correspondences and symbols that reference other cards to have same or similar colors. Love that the rainbow has been included in the Albano-Waite, which is an important symbol esoterically in this card. And I think it's extraordinary how well the water has been done in all three of these versions. Isn't that interesting? I wonder why the Weiser didn't color the man and woman in the Devil the same as in the Lovers. Ooh, and there's one thing about the Albano-Waite. So when I look at this card, I'm just wondering why the green sleeves. We also have a bit of purple and blue here too. This is a card that we can look at and compare and contrast with the Ten of Cups. And when the color shift isn't consistent, then it's harder to do that. One of the things I like about the Albano-Waite and the Weiser Tarot is that the star card does look more like it's drawn at night. And same comment for the moon card. And here you can see in the sun card that Mary Hanson Roberts really did her own thing in coloring and even the line drawings of this card. The wall looks very different. You don't see the lines on the flag. The little squiggle to the right of the Roman numeral 19 isn't there. The face of the sun looks different. Look at the eyes of the angel in the judgment card. Different expression in the universal, almost as if the angel is looking within. I've seen this glare before when somebody is lost in meditation and they are lost in another place, whereas the angel in the two decks on the left in a way is sending energy in a downward direction to the people that are below. I kind of like the way that there is a reflection of the skin tones in the six people that are in the Weiser Tarot. The other thing, too, about the universal is that in its clarity, it gets away from the original style of Pamela Colman Smith's artwork. So, just looking at the majors, is there one of these three decks that you find most appealing? One of the things that wasn't apparent in the first pile of cards was the card stock quality, and I can see just by looking at these piles here that the Weiser Tarot is a much superior quality of card. It is not by any means too cardboardy or thick, just a superior cardstock quality to the cards on the left, to the decks on the left and right, which are very different from the kind of paper that US Games is presently using for their decks. Something kind of magical about the rainbow colors and the Ace of Wands and the Universal. One of the things I love for tarot students is for them to choose a deck where the minor arcana is kind of color coded. And I think both the deck on the left and in the center, do a really good job with that. In the wands, you can see the fiery tones in the sky, in the earth. And perhaps that is one of the things that was hidden in the original deck. And you can tell there's artistic license in all of these decks. The faces are a slightly different shape. So here's another example. This is a lunar decan, and it is a 9. So the Sephira is the moon, and the decan is the moon. And yes, we are still in the suit of wands. And I would just love to have a nighttime setting here. Just a little clue, especially to beginner readers, to help learn and study the decans and the planetary correspondences. I think the blurriness of layers in the Albano-Waite and the major arcana isn't as apparent in most of the minors. And again, just notice how the color changes might affect an interpretation. And also how a color change may enhance or make something more clear. And it's interesting in the Weiser Tarot that the decanic information is not on the cards. Why would you just put it on the majors? And I think I mentioned this card in my chat last Saturday, thinking that this card was red, very red, but it's not, it's green. And I mentioned that I like that. And I was thinking of the Death card, which has the red background for Mars. This particular card is a triple Mars card, number 5, Sephira of Gemera. Decanically, it is Mars, and by Scorpio, it is Mars. So, why this green color? Tell me what you think. Kind of odd that this card would look like a nighttime setting. And this card is missing the Pamela Colman Smith signature. I wonder if that was a mistake. Okay, let's have a close look at this card. Very psychedelic rainbow. I kind of love that. I pulled out the Tower card so we could have a look to see if there was any consistency in the clothing of the figures. And just at hand, so we have yellow, yellow, blue, blue. And this is something I think that is important in this card, in that the children are a reflection of the adults. And so we have different colored clothing on the children and the adults here, as well as in this card. So in the Weiser Tarot, it would be kind of difficult to make an association between the figures. This is the Albano-Waite, and again, different colored clothing, and also in the Universal. Is this important? Does it matter to you? It may not. But with me teaching tarot and teaching correspondences and teaching the connections among cards, these are things that have come to be important. So I would say that having a deck like the Centennial as a first deck and then having a recolored deck to compare and contrast, great idea. But I don't think that I would suggest any of these decks as a first Waite-Smith deck if you were deeply studying the deck. So, what do you think? Is there a general mood difference among the decks? And I have to say, I think the Queen of Cups in the Weiser is a little bit dark. And the color choice of the throne of the Queen of Cups in the Albano-Waite is really something kind of funky. I will share with you either the Groovy Weight or one of the other recolored decks by Tarot Collectibles. Maybe we could actually do that. I could bring in some of the Albano-Waite decks as well too. This is not the only wildly psychedelic colored version of the Waite-Smith deck out there. So, if you are looking for a color palette to help you learn a particular suit, then have a look through the whole suit to see if there is a theme, a consistency of color. And I believe we do have purple and yellow as themes in these two decks. I love that Pamela Colman Smith studied Japanese woodcuts. And I really love that style, that technique. And I really love how that technique shines through in the original artwork. And here's another card I wish was consistently a nighttime scene. I think the Weiser color is really good. If you reach for a version of the Waite-Smith Tarot, which one do you prefer? Kind of like the gold swords here. That also supports the yellow theme of this suit. They're really stunning, actually, the gold swords. Kind of odd that this face looks lifelike on the throne of the Queen of Swords. A very gold King of Swords in the Albano-Waite. I do like the Universal for so many reasons, and yet I also love the ones that look more lino cut. I commend the Weiser Tarot on its effort to be more inclusive, for sure. And I love the grooviness, the 1960s touch in the Albano. I really think there is a place for all of these decks, whether it's for collectors or just taste. And I have been very fond of the Pentacles in the Albano for a long time. In looking at these decks, does it change your opinion in any way of how you see these cards? And the Weiser stained glass window is so beautiful. Great job. One of Sadhana's favorite cards in this deck. Which one? I think I like the Universal. Weiser's too dark. So why in the Weiser are there no Venus symbols on the robe in the Nine of Pentacles? Maybe because the robe is a greenish color, but it looks more gray than green. And the shadow on the face in the Albano-Waite, I don't know if that needs to be there. I have to say the Ten of Pentacles in the Albano-Waite does do a great job of highlighting all the little details in that card. And honestly, I love the way that Jensen writes about these decks. I do need to get my hands on the larger version on his book. The level of the variety of mysticism that the Golden Dawn adepts studied was really incredible. And there you have it. Can I ask you a question? If you had to choose a nickname for each of these decks based on their color, based on their mood, what might that nickname be? All right, so that's a wrap for today. There will be at least one more of these videos where I compare versions of the Waite-Smith Tarot, and I want to really thank you for your comments. They are so greatly appreciated. Have a lovely rest of your day. Namaste.